Well, it's a good evening from the studios in Brisbane, Queensland, Australia, and of course it's a Thursday night. And our guest tonight is from the UK, which is going to be in the morning over there. They've just come over from daylight saving, and that's an interesting morning for them. I understand it's raining, and it's Valentine's Day yesterday, or 1st of May. So anyway, with all that said and done, Andrea, take it away, love.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Good morning, everybody, and good day, and welcome to anybody who's new listening to Dreaming a New Dream. And today it's the 2nd of May, 2024. And happy Beltane to all the people in the northern side of the world. Glastonbury was absolutely chock-a-block and full yesterday with maidens and green men and goddesses and all sorts of wonderful things going on. Anyway, without further ado, it is my great pleasure to have Mr. Richard Vobes on the show. Welcome, Richard. It's lovely to have you as our guest today.
Well, thank you so much for asking me to be on your show. It's a great honour to be here.
Well, thank you very much. So some people know you as the Bald Explorer. Some people know you lots of other names. And you've been on quite a journey so far in this stage of your life, because I know that you're a man with many hats, shall we say, and many talents. So I know you've been like a filmmaker, a compere, a comedian, historian, and you're now exploring Britain with the lovely Julia. And in your bio, I came across the English couple. I had no idea what that was. So I had a look to see all the different things that you or Julia had been doing, going all around the country, which is amazing. So can we start at the very beginning, the different steps that have led you to where you are now today? And just because I know you're quite a comedian, because I've seen you quite a couple of times. I saw you in Glastonbury with Sandy and Roseanne weeks ago, and you had everybody in fits there doing your comedy bit. So can you tell me how all this came about?
Well, I'll try. As you say, it's not been a conventional life, I think, for me, which I'm very thrilled about. So where would you like me to start?
Well, the very beginning.
At the very beginning.
Yeah, you started off in Hampshire. So
I did. I was born in Hampshire. Funnily enough, at a very young age, I was born in Hampshire and didn't really know very much about it. But I've been back to the cottage hospital, which is in a place called Liss near Petersfield. And I think it's now a retirement home, which is very strange to think that it was a cottage hospital back in the early 60s. And now it's for retirement people. I feel that they're just waiting for me to return. Which would be a little bit strange to do. However, yes, I was born there, but I wasn't there for very long in Hampshire. My parents lived fairly nearby. I forget the name of the little village just outside Havant, which is down near Portsmouth. But we moved to Sussex, to a place called Horsham, when I was 5, and I lived there until I was 18, attending the various schools. Not very happy memories of school, to be honest with you.
Who does?
Yeah, well, exactly. Who does? And but one of the things that was very fortuitous, I think, for me, is where we lived was right on the edge of town, and there was a farm. And so my friends and I would go and play in the fields of this farm. At the time, it was a working farm, and eventually it was worked by an elderly farmer, and I think his wife died, and then soon after he died, and it was abandoned for about 5 years. But it was actually owned, then it went to his son. He was a farmer, but he farmed somewhere else. So the farm was just left, as I say, abandoned, and the old farmhouse used to be, and the stables and the barns and all of that became our playing area. And you can imagine what an amazing adventure playground that was. And when I was about 15, we were playing in the fields, as we were doing, mucking about, doing whatever kids did. And we noticed some people at this farm, and there was this Ford Capri, as I remember it. If people remember the old Ford Capri.
Yeah.
And to get to the farm, it was an old unmetalled road, an unmetalled road, sort of stony road that would bump down this long old path to get to the farmhouse. And from the fields, you could watch this vehicle going up and approaching the farmhouse. And two blokes leapt out of it, stopped rather abruptly in front of the buildings. Two blokes leapt out, rolled onto their haunches, and were pointing at the farmhouse. And we thought that's a bit strange. And then they got back in their car, reversed up a bit, and then repeated this about 3 times. And as we watched, we were creeping through through the fields and keeping to the hedgerow and thing. And we realized they had guns in their hands. And we're thinking, oh my goodness, what's going on? But then we noticed they were pointing these guns at these guys who had a camera. And we realized they were making a film. And so very surreptitiously, we crept even closer to spy on them to see what this was all about. Well, it turned out it was a bunch of people who were making a promotional film about their stunt abilities. So they were stuntmen. And they proceeded, I mean, this is like boys' own stuff. They proceeded with this very vague storyline of which a girl had been kidnapped, and these two blokes in the Capri who had leapt out were there as like Bodie and Doyle type things from The Professionals, plainclothes policemen with guns. And this is in the 1970s, you know. And they chased after the kidnappers. There were guns going off. They clambered up onto the roof. One of them was shot and fell through a veranda and crashed down. Another one one of the bad guys was shot as he was climbing along the rooftop of the farm and rolled off and hit the ground. And then eventually the girl was ushered into this upper floor of a brick barn, which was set on fire. And the rescuers had to go in and got hold of her. And she came out with her back on fire. And anyway, they rescued her. But this was all in stages. But that was the sort of bit. So we watched them set up all these different things with cardboard boxes and mattresses on the top, so that when they were doing these stunts falling off the rooftop, they would fall and land. And of course, you didn't see that bit on the camera. And we were just absolutely mesmerized. And eventually, you know, we were there standing by them watching, and they were telling us what they were doing. And that was the beginning, really, for me, at that early impressionable age of what am I going to do? I thought, this is what I've got to do. I've got to either be an actor or I've got to be a filmmaker, because it just seemed the most enjoyable thing that had ever happened to me. And whilst I can't say that I ever ended up in Hollywood making action films, which these days now I look back and think, well, perhaps that's a good idea. It certainly proved inspiration, and changed how I thought about school, about the sort of things I wanted to do, and all of that. So yeah, that was pivotal, I think, to the journey that I have been on since. And I can see we're looking at the old Capri car there. I think the one we looked at was a classic grey one that people would drive around. It's very strange to see them now, because they do look very vintage.
Well, it's interesting that experience arrived on your doorstep, so to speak.
Yeah, quite literally on the door. It was right at the back of the house, and unexpected too. But the farm was it was a fascinating place, because we also found, and sometimes trying to put these things into order, into a chronological order, isn't easy. But we found 2 other interesting things, not that really related to where I am now, but one was the derelict farmhouse had a little back toilet, a sort of brick toilet on the back, and the house was empty and falling to bits and what have you, water coming through the roof and all the furniture gone and the windows broken. But in this toilet area at the back was this tiny, well, I imagine it must have been like a tin, cocoa tin or something like that, And we stumbled in it one day, and we were rummaging around, as you do, nosy kids. And we opened it up, and inside were 21 £1 notes, when you actually had £1 notes, back in the original £1 notes in the 70s.
Yeah.
And I think 4 10-shilling notes. And my goodness, we thought we were millionaires.
I
We
bet.
found this. I ran back to my dad and said, look what we found. What should we do with it? And he was sort of going, well, let's have a look there. He said, well, I'll take the odd pound. You can have £10 each and keep the 2 10-shilling notes each, but keep them in a safe place. It must have been after that. It was after we'd gone from imperial to
decimalisation.
Yeah, so we could still spend the £1 notes, but we couldn't spend the 10 shillings. I imagine you could take it to the bank and get them changed, but we just kept them. And I regret now that I no longer have them.
Yeah, I bet.
I mean, we didn't spend them. I just kept them. But in moving about and what have you, I think wherever it was, I had them in. It's now long gone. But that was one of the things. The other thing that we found at the rear, funnily enough, at the rear of that, there must have been a bit of we used to collect old bottles, the sort of Victorian bottles, the cod bottles with the little marble in and things like that, and the poison blue bottles. There must have been a Victorian tip, or over the years where the farm had been, they just tipped stuff in. So we were rummaging around trying to collect bottles, and then one day we unearthed a grenade.
Oh, gosh.
And it was a rusty grenade. I mean, very, very rusty. And now, bear in mind, my mate Peter and I were fairly ignorant, really. And we saw this thing, and first of all, it was like, "My God, it's a grenade!" And we thought, "I wonder if we can get it to go off."
Ooh.
So we very gingerly put it on some rocks or some bricks, and we stood a distance. Which actually, if it had gone off, it would have maimed us, if not killed us. And we started to throw things at it to try and agitate it, because the pin was that rusty that we thought it wouldn't take much, just a few bangs and it would go off, but it didn't. So in the end, we ran back and again spoke to my dad, said there's a grenade up there, and he came in and he went, "Oh my God." He said, keep clear. And he rang the police, and that afternoon the bomb disposal unit came out. And I think actually, in retrospect, they blew it up. They got us back and they blew it up with some plastic explosives. But I think it was probably quite safe. I think they could probably have just taken it away. But for the fun of it, to show us how dangerous it was, and probably for them to have a bit of fun, it was on farmland. There was no one to clear away. They just blew it up. and we watched it, and it wasn't as impressive when they blew it up as I thought it might. I thought it was going to be a massive, like a nuclear explosion, but it was just a sort of a loud bang. So the farm was a great place for young boys to enjoy. Absolutely.
Definitely.
But now, unfortunately, when I was 18 and I'd left home, it was just at the beginning where this was beginning to be developed. And now it's one of these god-awful modern housing developments with no life in it. And, well, there's people in it, but it's...
we know what you mean.
You know what I mean? It's sort of horrible things. And it's a shame, because I subsequently went back and made a video called "They Stole My Childhood," because by building on that whole area, it's completely unrecognizable now for what it was. And I was trying to work out that the farmhouse was here and the barn that we made as a camp was over there, because these are people's houses and what have you. There was this old orchard that we used to play in, and that, of course, is all built on. But there was a pond, and the pond is still there, albeit surrounded by new builds. And it was quite amazing, really, to see that one bit of my heritage still there, although, but I did feel the soul had been ripped out of the land. We used to find, because it was a farmland for some generations, hundreds of years, we used to find old clay pipes from when the the men would be ploughing the fields with horse and plough, and we'd find these old clay pipes. So the clay bowl, you would often find many of the stems, because that's what would happen. These old clay pipes, they would break, but we would find some with motifs on them, like Indian chiefs' heads on these things, or very often just sort of very plain. But they were littered with these things. So, you know, anybody living in that area and digging in their garden may well be finding these old clay pipes that got buried over the centuries. It's such a shame. And I regret that very much, because farmland to me, of course, is very important. For
now more than ever, eh?
And absolutely, yeah, definitely. So yes, they were.
I've been watching that. I've been watching that Jeremy Clarkson's farm, and he really shown it to the people of England, of Britain, what it's like to be a farmer. I think it's the best thing that's ever happened to get people fully aware of the consciousness of having of farm belts and farmers.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, Jeremy Clarkson is a Marmite character. Some people like him, some people hate him. However, the Clarkson Farm series, and I think they're about to release the third series anytime soon, has done a huge amount for farming, even though it is a bit over the top, and to a certain degree, elements of the program have been devised to be problematic, so that there are conflicts within that. He is highlighting the problems that farmers go through in order to bring food to the table, and I think that is a good thing, because there have been plenty of what you might call just everyday farming programs, but it doesn't necessarily bring people's attention to it. Sometimes you have to be a bit over the top with a massive tractor and sheep jumping over the hedges and running around and running amok. But I think in series 2, he really highlighted how the council and the red tape were prohibiting him doing stuff which seemed to be the benefit of the local people and food production in and of itself. So I totally agree. So I am looking forward to the next one to see what nonsense he gets up to next.
Yeah, that's good, bud.
Yeah. Right. So
moving on.
Yeah, you've had a great start. You know, like you say, typical boys. You know, and to have the film and arrive on your doorstep and watch all that.
Yes. So as a kid, of course, I wanted to be an actor. That was one of the things. And there was a local amateur dramatics place that was held very close by, about a mile or so away to me. And it was in an old barracks, an old army barracks. I didn't know at the time. I subsequently learned that it was a bomb disposal barracks. And it's like really weird that I'd had that experience with the grenade and the bomb disposal unit coming out. I had at the time I didn't know that. I just thought it was an ordinary barracks because it had the parade ground and the old huts. But in one of the huts, there was an amateur theatre group would come. And I think in the other huts were used for other hobbies and various organizations and things. So I became a member of the young players there and was involved. The very first thing I was involved with was Toad of Toad Hall. They were putting on a production of that, and so I got involved in that and various other productions. And I started to act in those, and to I was going to say much acclaim, but to the local paper they would write reviews, and then there would be pictures of me playing parts, and quite why they picked me out, I don't know. But I was getting sort of renowned, I suppose, locally. And then I started to do drama courses that were held in Sussex by the regional drama advisor at the council, which I don't know whether other councils had this. I mean, this was
now.
Do they? West Sussex County Council it was. And very lovely bloke, George Rawlings, who ran this thing. And I loved it. and I absolutely loved it. I tried to get on every course I could do, and they ran courses for students. They ran them for amateur dramatics and for semi-pros, and I would just keep applying, and I became known in there. And curiously, one day there was a guy there who came from Czechoslovakia who was teaching mime, and I was quite curious about mime, so I went on these courses. And then one time he couldn't make it. There was a problem with the aeroplane or something. He couldn't make it, and they were a bit worried. So what are we going to do? We've got all these people, and we've got this mime course. So George came up to me and he said, Richard, you'll be able to run the course, wouldn't you? You've done the mime thing a few times. You go and do it. It's like, oh, blimey, I don't know the first thing about it, really. But what you don't know, what you don't know, you soon learn teaching it. So I got these guys together, and we were teaching. I was teaching them, and people would ask me questions, and I had to just think very quickly on the techniques of doing it. Now, subsequently, there are a little bit of mime for you.
Yeah.
I subsequently have been to mime school a few years later, because I actually found it fascinating and interesting. And people might think, hang on a minute, mime, what is that? They always think of Marcel Marceau, the white-faced, stripy T-shirt, white gloves Frenchman, who was still doing mime at 80 years of age, one-man shows. Incredible.
Really? Wow.
And was flexible and able to move at 80. Absolutely amazing. Because the training is a bit like ballet. You really do need to know how your body works. And as Rowan Atkinson said, I think in one of his various things, my body is my tool, which is very true, actually. So I was doing a bit of all of that, but then, as I say, I did subsequently go to mime school, and that was in Shepherd's Bush in London, and the teacher there, Desmond Jones, very down to earth, very lovely bloke, and I spent a year doing that. Now, mime is very similar to filmmaking, because in mime, there's so many ideas about what mime is. I won't get into all of that, but mostly people think it's the silent language, a universal language of mime, as they say. You can be anywhere, and as long as you can convey what you're saying physically and visually, you can tell a story. And you need to make it very clear. If you take the language out of it, dialogue, you've got to make it very precise and very clear. And in order to do that, you isolate your body quite a bit by moving less certain parts of the body and moving the bits of the body you want to emphasize. So if, for example, you're having a cup of tea in your performance, and you're stirring the spoon, everything else in you wouldn't move around, and you would just focus on the bit that you're trying to draw attention to, which takes your eye, especially if you're just one man on a stage and that's all they've got to go by, so they can see what you're doing. And it's very similar to filmmaking, where you take a big close-up and you show just that one movement because everything else is unnecessary. So I learned a lot about filmmaking, funnily enough, from doing mime. And at the same time, because I had that experience with these people doing their stunt film, my friend and I, once they had left, and before I went to mime school, I'd borrowed my dad's SLR camera, film camera, snap camera, just 36 or 24 exposure camera. And we replicated what they did, bar the fire, in slides, in transparencies, so that we could have a slide show of the same thing. So I got my sister and a friend, and we went up there and we took photographs. We clambered up onto the roof. They'd left their mattresses and boxes. So we, as kids, we just copied it all, and we did all the same stunts, apart from the fire, because we didn't have petroleum jelly that you could set on fire and all of that. So I'd started sort of doing my own filming, and then on to Super 8. So by the time I went to mime school, I really understood how you focus people's attention, and so combining the two together was quite fun. But at mime school, I learned circus skills because there were various people from all sorts of different walks of life, people who juggled, people who rode unicycles, people who ate fire and things like that. So we were learning from one another. And I soon got on to earn a living. Now I'm in my 20s. To earn a living, I got into the corporate circuit, and the sort of family fun shows, galas, events. So street theatre, that sort of thing, fire eating, lying on a bed of nails, walking on stilts, juggling, all sorts of silly things. So I was like all over the country performing, and hence that sort of sense of performance, really, which is which I still have, and put into the talks that I do even now. I can't help it.
Yeah, no, but you had us all in fits. It with Clive and Sandy's talk, or Roseanne's talk. You were there with a case, and I don't know how you were doing it, but I mean, you had us all in fits of laughter. So you're very entertaining on many levels.
Thank you very well. One tries, one tries. And it must be in the blood, because my dad used to do conjuring. He used to do a bit of magic. I never thought he was any good at it, but I think he was, really. But because I was his son and I knew how they were done, because he would show me, I would always see him doing it, doing the sleight of hand and things. And so I was thinking, everybody can see, Dad. They can see how you're doing it. But they didn't. They fell under his spell, and he did that as an amateur, not as a professional. His business was making aerials, and he'd been trained in radio frequencies and things like that, which is quite interesting these days when we know about what radio frequencies can do from a good point or a bad point of view.
Can I just stop you there? Can I just ask you a dumb question? When you're talking about Marcel, what's the name?
Marcel Marceau.
Yeah. I was also getting the picture of Charlie Chaplin and the Stooges, because they all black and white. They had to convey their message through the whole animation of their body, which was the tool, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And that whole art form has dwindled into a sort of a niche now. But it's funny because every now and again there would be programs that would use effectively silent humor. The Plank with Eric Sykes being a relatively recent, and then Mr. Bean when it came out. And they win awards because it's so different, and you have to think in a different way of telling your story, especially in slapstick or things like that. But yes, my favorite was Laurel and Hardy, of course. Absolutely brilliant, and they were hugely influential to obviously many comedians, Morecambe and Wise and people like that. But to people like myself, and their timing and how they work together. But all of that.
Lucille Ball was a very good comic in that sense too, wasn't it? Her timing was impeccable.
And we all borrow from each other. That's the thing, whatever type of performer you are, you've got to start somewhere, and you see something and you think, oh, I'd like to do that. And then you may copy their routine a bit, but it's never precisely the same. And over time, you develop your own style without even knowing it, and it's very different. I
don't know about you, but when I saw Harry Corbett, I was going down the main streets and going into the windows and doing his his gestation, using his arms and his legs.
Oh yes, that's right. Yeah. I mean, so many of those sort of very strange visual gags that people use, and of course in mime you're trying to think of that all the time, and you get into a bit of a mindset on how you come up with these original concepts. You do have to be slightly barking mad, I think.
It helps.
It certainly does. Yeah, absolutely, and it just sets you apart from the crowd. And as a performer, that's you need to be able to be set against the crowd, because people are looking at you, and there does seem to be a certain amount of ego involved, but there's a level where it becomes bad for you. Let's say, we know that ego is not a good thing, but in a professional way, you know, if you're just too dull and boring and what have you, no one's going to take any notice, because you've got to be entertaining. That's the whole point of it.
But what was it? Who was it? Eric Sykes? Who was the guy who died on stage and everybody's cracked up laughing, didn't realize he died?
Tommy Cooper.
Yeah, Tommy Cooper.
Yeah.
I remember watching that on the telly as it happened, and I knew something was wrong. And then in the roll call at the end, when everybody came on, he was missing because he'd been taken to hospital, but later pronounced dead. So that was very sad. But if you're going to go, and you're a performer, then why not in the middle of a trick? You know, that was the thing. In the middle of the trick, down he went. Bless his socks. And I mean, he was unique, Tommy Cooper. He did a one where he was not even on stage, and you could hear him through the microphone, apparently backstage in his dressing room. And you know, the curtains opened, and not like that. And people are laughing in the audience, and he's not even on stage. I'm coming. I'm a bit late. So yeah, he was, and you know, you get these unique people. But
can I ask you something else? I mean, you can be fly the seats type individual, or you can create the storyboard of saying this is how we're going to play the role, so that everybody who's going to be either the photographer or the boom operator or the gaffer, they can see how the plays or that particular show is going to be put together. But I feel that you're more the intuitive, inspirational. You're in the moment. You seize the moment, and everybody else just has to follow you. Is that where I'm going with you?
That's very true. I think if you're a live performer, if you're on stage and you're in the moment, you can experiment with going off a bit off the script, as it were, and doing things like street theatre. You never quite know what's going to happen. And I would take people out of volunteers out the audience. You never quite know how they're going to react. I would get them to stand on me if I'm on a bed of nails, for example, and I'd always look for the largest person in the audience and then get him out, you know, because it would be more dramatic. And I've got these 6-inch fairly sharp nails. I mean, they were sharp-ish. I mean, and I didn't do anything to them, you know, I didn't file them down or anything. And people would come and say, yeah, they're real nails. And then you get this guy to stand on you, and you just hope to God he didn't crack your ribs. I wasn't so much worried about the nails going in my back. It was more about breaking my ribs or not being able to breathe. But you never quite know. And it is quite fun to sort of go with the flow. And sometimes in my talks that I do now, which is, you know, much further on from what I was doing before in terms of the things I'm talking about the sort of political situation and the way that we're being governed and what's true and where freedom is and all that. I don't prepare anything. I just walk out in front of the audience and things occur to me as I do it, which is lovely. But I have in the past put together the films where it's all been scripted and, you know, this shot, and I've storyboarded and done all that. Just, it's such a lot of hard work, and I don't mind that. But you can spend I used to do that on the very, very early YouTube videos that I would do, and nobody would watch them. And then now I'll sit in a chair and spout some rubbish with one, you know, without having to alter the camera or anything. And people watch in their thousands, which I'm, you know, very pleased about. But there's that sort of sense that I would love them to have watched the early work where I really put sweat and tears into it. But nobody was the slightest interest. So, you know, that sometimes it's very strange how fate dishes things up.
Definitely. Because if we go back to your shows, I was just wondering, because I mean, sometimes you do 2 a day. I mean, you've usually got one every day, and I know it pops up. I mean, you know, all credit to you. I only watch little bits. For me, all of this stuff on the internet is too much, and that's just the way I am. But how far advanced do you book people, and are you getting invitations all over the place to interview people? And, you know, how do you fine tune all of this, what you're doing? Because I know sometimes, you know, when people ask questions or they say things and you think, oh my God. But, you know, you have to sit there and nod away and keep smiling, don't you?
Oh, yeah. Well, I am the nodding dog, you know. So you do an hour's interview. I have to say that everybody on the show, I mean, apart from a couple of people, and I haven't put those, everything's pre-recorded. So
Yeah.
I haven't put the ones that were really, I was going to say, yeah, atrocious. I think that's the best word. I did have a gentleman once who said he was going to tell me a lot of very interesting things about money, money creation and all this sort of stuff. And then, but when it came to it, he hadn't the first idea. And I said to him, you know, why do you suppose people are using money, cash at the moment, knowing that there are threats to cash and the movement to electronic cash, CBDCs and things. And he said, oh, I just think it's a fashion at the moment. I just think it's a fashion. It's a fad. And I realized straight away that he had no knowledge what he was talking about. And then another thing he'd said was that he'd been arrested during one of the protests during the COVID lockdowns. And he'd gone out to protest with a bunch of other people. And I thought, oh, well, that sounds juicy. Let's get into that. And I said, tell me about this being arrested then during the protest. And he said, well, it was right at the end and we'd finished the protest and these policemen came up and I walked over to my bicycle and this policeman told me to hurry up and go home. And I said, yeah. And then what happened? I said, well, I got on my bike and I went home. And I said, hang on a minute. I thought you said you got arrested. He said, well, it felt like I'd got arrested. It felt like it. I said, oh, so you weren't slammed into the back of a Black Maria and taken down to the station and stood in a cell for 24 hours. Oh, God, no, nothing like that. So I thought this can't go out because it would make him look very weak. Yeah. And it would, you know, it wouldn't do him any favors. And of course, it'd make the show look a bit silly that I was interviewing, you know, bless him. I just had to say to him after, so thanks ever so much. That's very kind of, I'll let you know. And then the next day I said, I don't think we'd be putting that out. And he was, oh, okay, fair enough. And it was, you know, you don't want to be in that position where it hadn't worked.
No.
But mostly, as you say, yes, I book people it's usually about a month in advance. It just filled up these interviews that I do on YouTube. I was finding people were very keen to come on the show and talk about all sorts of things from, well, money creation and sovereignty, health, spirituality, all sorts of fascinating things. Took me on a journey that I had completely no knowledge of and unexpected. And some of it was very challenging. And I realized right at the beginning, if I was going to do these, I would have to have an open mind and just accept what people said, not challenge it. In the past, I would have been perhaps a bit more forensic with them and said, well, what do you mean by that? And how can that possibly work when they're telling you things like bioresonance, a machine over here in a different country can still actually operate on your health millions of miles, not millions, but, you know, thousands of miles away. Yeah. Or how you can talk to water, and if you give it love, it's beneficial to you, and if you sort of give it hate, as it were, it's detrimental to you. And so you had to have an open mind, and it took me on this journey. And I, as I say, I would have been a bit more sort of in denial of things, but taking that attitude was the best thing that I could possibly have done, because I learned so much. It humbled me as well. And you thought, wow, there's so many interesting people, and there's so much more to life than meets the eye that that we normally think of. The sort of, you go to work, you go to school, you go to work, you get your pension, you retire and die. And actually, you know, we should be enjoying and thriving in our lives. Yeah. So, and of course, there's so much of history that's been hidden, and particularly in the health world, there's lots of stuff that's been occulted, and big industry has taken it to their advantage so that we don't know, so they can sell us more. And I think we're now beginning to realize that in bigger numbers and free ourselves from that one way of thinking, and an alternative health that used to be the thing, you know, the wise woman in the village, and people used to be able to name the plants and name the trees and the herbs, and would, you know, and the doctors were quacks in those days. What, take that, you're joking. But now, because we, you know, the whole thinking has been switched. But yes, I do sit there and I do nod. Because ultimately, I think it's down to the audience. You know, it's for the audience to decide, not for me to pass criticism or put a judgment or anything. It's down to the audience to sort of go, well, that was really interesting, or not. You know, whether they believe it or not, it's up to them. And I sort of say, I don't always say it in every show, but it's down to them to do their due diligence, not just to accept anything foolhardily, but at the same time, to take it on board, have an open mind, because you never know what might be said may well be beneficial to them,
and may not.
And of course may not. But you know, we have been, our minds are closed to most things which we don't understand, and that's been detrimental to us in many ways, because I think we've ignored so many good things and not realized it, because we've given away our responsibility to all these bodies, these wonderful, kind, benevolent governments and their various quangos who say, well, don't worry, we'll do that for you, we'll look after that for you. And in the end, we've become a bit impotent. We don't know how to do things. We can barely stand on our own 2 feet anymore without somebody saying, oh, here's a crutch for you. Oh, thanks very much, that's very kind. I couldn't possibly survive without it. When of course we can, because we're incredible people with so much potential, but the system has kept us in our place.
Not for much longer, eh?
You guys in England, you had a guy called David Frost, and then you had Michael Parkinson, and both those individuals really knew their craft. Particularly, I like Michael in his way. He had a clipboard and you could see he had his questions there, but once he fired off his first question, I'd see that clipboard be placed to one side, and he was just ingrained with the conversation, because he knew that as he was listening, the next question was formulating, and it took you on a journey. It was very good. Yes.
I remember all these old David Frost, hello, good evening, and welcome, as he used to say.
Yeah, it's quite aggressive. He got right into the meat of the what's the name, and then I see how you've gone onto your travels, and then you're a bit more like Alan Whitaker. Is it Whitaker?
Oh yes, Alan Whitaker with had that very long microphone, didn't he? And those big thick glasses, and he would on Wicker's World.
Wicker's World, that's it. Yeah, Wicker's World.
I can't really do an impression of. I can hear his voice. Alan Whitaker. But yes, some are more easier to do. But yes, he very much an explorative sort of figure in a nice suit, in a black suit, you know, which was very formal. And there he'd be in, I don't know, some Indian tribe somewhere in a black suit. It's so incongruous and so English, you know. But I love that. I do love that sort of sense that. Because you get some presenters, and Michael Palin, of course, would sort of dress in the same garb as the places he'd going to a certain degree. But I love the fact that, you know, somebody in a suit. I wanted to make a film. I haven't made it, but I would love to have made one of these long pilgrimage type films on these walks that we get here. So there's one near me called the South Downs Way, but there's much longer ones. The what's the one in Spain where you go across the mountain range? Santiago, whatever it's called.
Starts with C.
Astilla.
Cosmo. Gizmo.
Yes.
Cosmo.
And then there's the Appalachian, you know, the Appalachian Mountains. Well, I would love to do all of those.
Camino,
that's right. The Camino, the one in Spain. My sister did it. But I would love to do that in a bowler hat and a 3-piece suit and an umbrella and patent leather shoes. See how far I can get.
Maybe Patrick, what's his name? Patrick Nee.
Patrick McNee from the Avengers.
Yeah, Avengers. Yeah.
Steed. Yeah, I'd love to do it. You know, in a completely incongruous outfit. inappropriate, and just see how far you could get before you're ripped to shreds, or it's as dusty and has fallen to bits, you know. But what a great image that would be, traveling. I say, oh, chaps, view out here is rather spiffing, isn't it? Don't you think? Have you shower?
Yeah, but what we don't see is we see a tube that goes to a refrigeration. So underneath you've got a bloody refrigerator suit.
Oh yes, I think a nice ice cold Pimm's would be appropriate at this moment. Thank you so much. It'd be rather jolly, but yes, not made that yet. That's in the bag. It's one of those one-day films.
Right, can we? Is there any of your shows that have really touched you on a deep level that you didn't expect?
Oh, now there's a question for me. Let me think about that. Well, certainly, I think things about who you are as a person in terms of the legal concept of who you are, the name, the legal fiction. You know, for example, when you say to people, when are you born? And they sort of name the day, and you say, well, how do you know that? You only know that because your mum and dad told you, and that's hearsay. You can't prove it legally. You can't prove it. So how do you know you were born on that day? Even though you were there, you're only two witnesses, really, your mum and dad, and maybe the midwife. And then they've given you a name, but it's and I find that concept fascinating. They've given you a name, but that you didn't have it when you were born. You didn't come out with a name scrolled on you. I'm Richard Vobes. Thanks very much. Nice to see you, everybody. You know, this is something that you're called. So the name isn't you. And I think this concept is fascinating because most people will answer to a name that they've lived with all their life and they haven't thought about it. But clearly it's just a label that's useful to get your attention or to identify you. But it isn't you, but people see it as themselves. So I think that thought process of realizing, oh, but if that's not me, then what is? You know, and the sort of spiritual aspect of it comes out. So that, I think, learning about that was a big surprise. The whole spiritual journey of understanding, again, I mean, that sort of led into that for me, of learning, well, who are you then? And what are you? And what is this aging flesh and blood that you carry around with you? And all of that. So that's been interesting. Some of the health stuff has been fascinating. Money creation. I think that's something that everybody needs to understand, that when you go into a bank or a building society and you say, I'd like to buy a house, and they say, oh yeah, no problem, I've got this is the house, it's 300,000, whatever it is. And they say, yeah, no problem, okay, we'll have a look at your background and see if we can rely on you to do the repayments and what have you, and you do all that. And they say, right, okay, here's the agreement. And then the moment you sign that agreement in and of itself is the £300,000 or whatever it is agreed. That's it. And you put that, they take it, put it into their vault, and they add the 300,000 noughts to your bank account, and then they ask you to pay them another £300,000 over 20, 25 years with interest. And it's the biggest scam going, because your signature, or rather your autograph on there, has created the money. And so they're not lending you anything. So that, to me, has been fascinating. The whole money creation and promissory notes, you know, the notes that we have in our pocket that we hand over, and it says on there, they're from the Bank of England. And then you learn that the Bank of England is not really a bank, and it's nothing to do with England. It's a company, a separate company from the government. And you, hello, what's going on here then? And we're buying all this stuff, and it says I promise to pay, but nobody actually pays. They say, oh, I promise to pay with this IOU, but no one says, well, go on then, pay. Well, what will I pay with? I mean, I think it's hilarious, and we're all using these notes, and of course now I've discovered that we can make up our own. I can be the Bank of Vobes, and it's you my own IOUs. It's whether anybody actually takes them or not is another thing, of course.
Yeah, of course.
But they can be securitized and turned into money. The whole system is, I mean, it's just, everything is so mind-boggling. So
like Monopoly.
Like Monopoly. Yeah.
Can I take you down another rabbit hole?
You can.
All right. There's a group that on the Gold Coast, and it came to our attention that one of the guys had gone to court, and the first thing they wanted to know was, is this your name? And the guy says, I'm aware of that name, but that's not my name. So he had actually lodged before the court his birth documents, and in his birth documents, the midwife had signed it as Baby M. So he called himself Baby M, and so now they're quoting this other name, Patrick. I know the name, but that's not me. I never had the opportunity to name that name. I'm actually Baby M. Yeah. But since later on I went to the births and deaths and marriages, I registered another name.
Yeah.
And so you got the wrong person here in the court today. Yeah. So the charges were dropped.
I love that. I heard the story of somebody coming into court, and they said, you know, are you John Smith, whatever his name was? And he said no. And he said, well, what is your name? He said, well, I'm known as John. And he said, well, are you John Smith? And he said, no. He said, well, is John Smith here? And he said, yes. And he took out a photocopy of his birth certificate, and he put it into the dock. And he said, John Smith is now in the dock. And said, he's there, but I'm still known as John. And it didn't like that.
No, I bet.
There was a bit of a ruckus. I don't know what happened afterwards, but I just thought that was hilarious.
There, yeah. Of course, Baby M stands for the baby, and M stands for male. You know.
Right. Yeah. So just a male baby. Fantastic. Yeah.
Straight out of Clarkson's farm.
Yeah, that's right.
Another lamb.
And this is my wife, Baby F.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting.
Oh, bloody hell.
Yeah.
Carry on. Sorry.
Right, I know we're coming nearest to the end. Can you quickly say about you and Julia, and you're doing these travels? What was it, the English couple? I mean, I only saw it briefly yesterday or the day before, and it looks like you're having quite an adventure going around on the farms and different things. So can you share about that, how that came about?
Of course, yes, absolutely. As you said at the beginning, some people know me as the Bald Explorer, and the Bald Explorer came about because on YouTube I was initially on my own exploring heritage, landscape and nature on YouTube, doing videos and visiting churches, heritage sites, and looking at nature as like at this time of year. I'll be looking at the buds on the trees and learning about the trees and the plants that are coming up, and going to different parts of the country. And I met Julia, and we started to do stuff together, and I brought her in on the channel, but it was still the Bald Explorer, and we would go off and do a bit of van life videos and things like that. But then as I started to talk about the things I now talk about on the sovereignty and the truth and health and all those sort of issues, and with the interviews, it was just me. And Julia said, oh, I've been elbowed out, haven't I? And I said, well, not intentionally. I said, let's set up another channel that is exclusively about us, and when we go traveling about, we'll record our adventures. So that became the English couple, and so that's what we do. And on the back of some of the venues that we go, that Julia comes with me and supports everything I do. She's absolutely brilliant, and I love her to bits. But when we go to some of the talks, like in Glastonbury and places like that, we'll go and try and do an English couple as a completely separate thing, not talking about the politics and the truth stuff, and just having fun. So we had to go to Buxton fairly recently, and I was booked to do a talk. So we had a walk around Buxton looking at this ancient spa town, and we took the waters, which comes out of the ground, and it's warm. The water comes out warm because it comes from deep down and up, whereas some other spring water is nearer the surface and is therefore cooler. But this is sort of, I don't know, it's like 15 to nearly 20 degrees centigrade. It's quite amazing. So it came out. So anyway, we film these things and talk about our adventures. And sometimes you see us. We were on a farm recently learning how to milk cows, which was great fun.
I bet.
And the cows were very welcoming. I was rubbish at the actual milking bit. Julia was really, really good at that. So yeah, so that's really what that is. It's still quite embryonic. I think we've only been doing it about a year now, just over a year. So we want to do more of those. And sadly, the Richard Vobes channel takes precedence because it's got a bigger audience and what have you. And we try to fit the English couple in, but we do try to do as many of those as we possibly can when we're out and about. And it's great for us because it takes our mind off all the shenanigans and it reminds people just to have fun, thrive, live a good life, have a bit of, don't take life too seriously.
Yeah, bringing back fun with a capital F. We need much more fun. We've had enough drama to last us, I don't know how many blooming lifetimes. So
Exactly.
It's like, let's make light of the situations. Let's all move forward and see how we can change things together.
Yes, absolutely. And that's what we try to do as much. And we do that in real, I mean, people, I don't know whether people have an opinion that I'm quite sort of, serious, talking about serious issues all the time. But actually, Julia and I, we just do some silly things off camera in life in general. We just have a laugh. And that's how we get through it all and don't take all these dark things that have been put onto us with much seriousness.
Yeah, totally.
I think people live in fear too easily.
But then they, with all what had happened in the past. Yeah. So, and now it's realizing that people make choices and we have to honor their soul's choices. It's not our way. And, we're here to help them if they want help. But otherwise, you let them go their own little way, don't you?
We do, which is hard when it's your children.
Yeah.
Who think you're barking mad, really.
Oh, quite.
And,
no, that way.
And you just have to go, well, I'm here when you need me.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what it's all about, isn't it? It's, there's more and more people having an awareness now of being misled or not being told truths. And, it's just being there to help people and talk things through and say, well, okay, that was then, but here we are now. Let's see how we can move on from it and how we can help others.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the only way to do it.
Right. Is there any words of wisdom you'd like to leave us with today?
Words of wisdom.
Not necessarily wisdom.
No, well, I read this yesterday, funnily enough, and it was on my mind for a bit. It's that if you can't control your mind, if you can't control your own mind, somebody else will control it for you. And I think that's so true that we need to just, not rely on everybody else, take back control of our worlds and our thinking, because we're being influenced all the time by adverts, by radio, by media, by billboards, by government, by narratives. And I think sometimes we just need to withdraw and spend more time thinking for ourselves. So that would be my words of wisdom, put on the spot, as it were.
No, with you every step of the way. So, well, I'm going to be following your adventures because I thought that looks like a lot of fun. And like I say, we need much more fun. So thank you for bringing fun and laughter and all what you do and what you're doing. Do you see yourself doing your shows for a lot longer, or are you just going with the flow and seeing how it?
I think that, I do love making the videos on all the fun videos. The interviews and stuff, I think, will slowly come to an end. I think we're going to, we want to get some land and we want to grow. So I want to inspire people to get back to sort of very basic, simple life, things that are actually important, and move away from the sort of the corporate world. That would be what I'm looking to try and do. So to chart that in a much more fun way and to give people a laugh, I think that's really, part of my purpose here, as much as possible.
Well, you've certainly given us a laugh. So thank you for being our guest this week. You've been an absolute delight. It's been lovely talking with you, and give our love to Julia.
I certainly will. And thank you so much for asking me to be on the show.
No, it's our pleasure.
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for listening, and same time, same place next week.
Okay.